It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying by rayrae118. Chapter 27. Ginny watched the hedges with worry, her hand grasping onto Hermione's with a strength the older girl hadn't known the redhead possessed. She didn't say anything, however, because she knew the girl was scared for her boyfriend. After almost an hour of staring into the hedges, the crowd jumped at a high-pitched scream and shouted and pointed at the red sparks that burst over the maze. A few minutes later, Fleur was brought out of the darkness, unconscious, and Madame Pomfrey descended as her family flocked to her side. Ginny sighed and they went back to waiting. It was another half an hour before the hedges started to melt back into the ground, even as Ginny gasped and screamed, "Harry!" The rest of the group looked at her confused, but she just continued to stare ahead, tears streaming down her face. They all turned back to the maze, trying to see what she was looking at, and were immediately confused at what appeared to be two missing champions. Victor was fighting a blast-ended Scroot, but Harry and Cedric were both absent. Chaos seemed to reign as Hermione shook Ginny, trying to get her attention. Finally, Ginny shook herself out and turned back to the witch next to her. Hermione frowned. "Ginny, what's going on?" Ginny just furrowed her brow, thinking as she surveyed the crowd. Something didn't feel right. Her gaze settled on their defense professor. Harry hadn't said anything, but she had caught on to his feelings of discomfort around the harsh man. And she had learnt that Harry's instincts were usually correct. He was currently looking rather shifty, as if waiting for something, and not at all concerned for the two students that were apparently missing. "Hermione," she said lowly, turning back to look at her friend. "Something is wrong. Look at Moody." The older girl turned to their professor, confused. Ginny elaborated. "Harry's had a bad feeling about him for a while, but he didn't think it was anything important. But I think he might have had something to do with it. He doesn't look worried about Harry and Cedric." Hermione studied the man in question and realised that Ginny was right. Moody was standing off to the side, but his expression was more anticipation. "What should we do?" she asked quietly, subconsciously deferring to the young girl, knowing that Ginny was much more like Harry, in that she was better to be able to lead in a battle situation when called for. Ginny bit her lip, trying to reach out to Harry, but she couldn't feel him at all. She wondered if he was incapacitated in some way, or if their bond just didn't stretch as far as wherever he was now. She hoped it was the latter, and wherever he was fighting. "Get the others," she said. "We'll watch him. If he tries something, we stun." Hermione nodded, and gestured for Ron, Neville and Susan to follow them, while the adults were all heading over to Dumbledore and Minerva to find out what was going on. The two girls explained to the others what they had observed, and the 5 students discreetly got into a position where they could watch their defense professor and be ready to act, should the situation require it. Harry braced his legs for impact and hit the ground with a thud, jarring his knees, but thankfully remained standing. The cup rolled away and Cedric picked himself up shakily. "A portkey?" he asked. Harry nodded, feeling of dread curling in his stomach. He tried to reach out to Ginny, but he couldn't seem to feel her. Apparently their bond was not quite strong enough to reach across the distance between them. Not that he had any idea where he was right now. It appeared to be a graveyard, and Harry studied a few gravestones, before he came to one in particular. "Tom Riddle, 1905 to 1943, was written on one stone. His stomach dropped, and Harry quickly made his way back to Cedric. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, keeping his voice as down as he could, but he was terrified. Cedric looked confused, but didn't argue as the two tried to hurry back to the cup. Before they reached it, however, a third figure entered the graveyard. Harry felt a headache coming on, but it wasn't bad enough to be debilitating. "Kill the spare!" A hissing sound came from the bundle the third figure was carrying. "Avada Kedavra!" A jet of green light made its way towards the two students, and with a shout, Harry threw himself on top of Cedric, feeling the heat of the spell as it passed over his shoulder. The two scrambled over behind a nearby gravestone. Cedric looked at Harry. "What do you reckon?" he asked quietly. Harry deliberated for a moment. It was clearly him they wanted. If Cedric could get out of here, he would be safe. Unfortunately, the cup was the only way he could think of to get out, and he didn't know where it was. He couldn't risk standing up to search for it. There was only one option he could think of. Harry was grateful at that moment that he had been practicing the disillusionment charm. He looked at Cedric in the eye. and the older boy was surprised at the heaviness he saw there. "I'm sorry about this," Harry whispered, before he petrified his friend. Cedric felt himself freeze up. He tried to will himself to move, but he couldn't. Harry's next spell felt like a raw egg being cracked onto his head. Without even looking, he knew he had been disillusioned. Harry's last look was one of pain as he whispered, "Tell Ginny I love her," before he stood up and walked around the gravestone. The stunner caught Harry on the shoulder and the world went dark. He woke some time later to find a cauldron set up in front of them. He appeared to be tied to the gravestone of Tom Riddle Sr., and the mystery third person's identity had finally been revealed. Peter Pettigrew, also known as Wormtail, was muttering as he added ingredients to the cauldron. There was a bundle of something sitting next to it, and Harry's keen eyes caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a skeletal hand protruding from the blanket. He walked over to the grave as Harry was tied to and levitated a bone, saying, "Bone of the father, unknowingly given, you will renew your son." His next act almost made Harry throw up, as his parent's betrayer cut off his own hand. "Flesh of the servant, willingly given, you will revive your master." He moved over to Harry and made a large cut on his left arm. He went back to the cauldron. "Blood of the enemy, forcibly taken, you will resurrect your foe." He then dropped the something into the cauldron. Harry got his first glimpse of the bundle and was revolted. It appeared to be the approximate size of a child, a baby, but it was the ugliest baby Harry had ever seen. Smoke began to rise from the cauldron, and a grown man stepped out. Harry gulped. Lord Voldemort had risen again. "Robe me," the man like being commanded, and a moment later he was standing clearly before Harry, and he got his first glimpse of the man who had ruined his life. He didn't look at all like a man, unless you counted the fact that he was around the same size and had a humanoid body. He had no hair, and his eyes were red. Instead of a nose, he simply had two slits sitting above his thin mouth. His skin was a grey pallor. "Ah, Wormtail, you have done well, very well. Give me your arm." Wormtail held out his left arm, breathing, "Thank you, master." Voldemort sneered, "Your other arm, Wormtail." He grabbed the appendage and pressed his finger to the deep black dark mark. Pettigrew hissed and Voldemort let go, letting the rat-like man scurry back. It was at that moment that Voldemort seemed to see Harry. "Ah, Harry Potter, welcome. I apologize that we cannot offer you more comfort, but you see, we were woefully unprepared for company. You stand on my father's grave, a worthless muggle that he was. But we have had the opportunity to create our own family. And look, Harry Potter, my real family returns." End of part 1. Here we go, people. I'm loving this. Time to really get down to business. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and hit that little bell to get notified. And you can also find me on Twitter if you want. See you next chapter, my guys, gals and non-binary pals. Hope you're having a good day, night or whatever time zone you're in. Bye!